Welcome back to Core Conversations, where we discuss innovation and technology advancements and how they are shaping the automotive industry. In this episode, we'll be talking about the future of dealerships' operations, including dealership OS, you heard that right, integrated marketplaces, and dealership security and PII protection. That's personal identifiable information for those noobs in the audience. Joining the conversation are Todd Smith, founder and CEO at QoreAI, and Maarten Sundman, who's the CTO at QoreAI. Nice to see you guys.
Hey, great to be here today.
Yeah,
excited to talk.
Yeah, me too. I think this is going to be a great episode. We've broken this down into two segments, and segment one really takes on the future of dealership operations, something that you guys are really brand new to the taking as something brand new into the marketplace of dealership operating system or dealership OS and integrated marketplace. And so I want to start really with helping the audience understand what's like the introduction to the dealership OS vision. Like there must be a problem here that kind of sets that up. So I guess that'd be my first question. Is there a problem with the current dealership software ecosystem that kind of made you guys go in this direction? And if that's the case, share a little bit of the vision there.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. It's a great question. And we really looked at it from dealerships have lots of software. Average dealer has 27 plus products that they use to complete sales transactions and manage customer relationships. And we saw that dealerships spend a lot of time having a CRM. They spent a lot of time, obviously, in the DMS space. So those spaces over the last 20, 30 years have been pretty well developed. But it left this, what we call messy middle of software that's disconnected. And we felt a huge opportunity to start connecting up tools that the dealership uses every single day in their daily workflow inside the operations for us to really streamline and create velocity around deals. So we wanted to start by building this OS that would focus on a few key attributes for us. One was to start around identity verification, critical, obviously, with all that's happened recently in the industry with hacks and fraud, etc. We wanted to also focus around secure document movement. So as we're selling cars today and some people are remote, we found it super important. How do we get information from the consumer into the dealership securely? And depending on text and email is a terrible idea, as well as depending on the salespeople's individual and personal devices to transmit that kind of data. And finally, we saw also another opportunity around credit to be able to help streamline, once you ID a customer, streamline credit and affordability and approval to match to the right inventory, and ultimately move them through the credit app experience seamlessly. So we saw those first three as the core of our operating system. And through that, we know we'll expand through time.
Interesting. So this vision sounds like you guys saw an opportunity for a lot of unification and integrating that, right now, I think dealers still probably don't always realize even how difficult it is when all of these pieces are not connected. There isn't a place where all of that comes together seamlessly that really helps with operational efficiencies. It sounds like that was a big part of what kind of your catalyst for wanting to put something like this together. Does that sound, do I have that right?
Definitely. The words seamless and automotive are not in the same universe. I mean, let's be real here. Automotive is the master of disconnected technology and dated to me fortresses, as well as using antiquated ways to even move information. FTP, or let's say secure FTP, flat file movement versus a more natural API environment, which again is pretty common outside of our industry. So for us, it was really helping the dealer just unify the technology, making it easier for them to administer and manage, as well as manage their employees. Because it's hard when you fire someone and you have to knock them out of 15 or 20 different systems. Most dealers forget to do that. That alone creates a security hole and flaw that we thought we could fill by connecting all services a dealer is already using inside one operating system.
It's exciting. I think the more the dealers find out what you guys are doing, I think they'll realize that this is something that's been long overdue. I'd like to move along to this part of the integrated marketplace concept. I think that's very interesting. I'm curious to know, why you're building an ecosystem like that. Tell me more, a little bit about that. I think the audience would be very curious.
Yeah, another great question. I think when we looked at creating the marketplace, again, we looked outside the industry and we looked for inspiration. That inspiration was you cannot build everything to the best quality product and expect it to stand the test of time. And we knew that. So for us, we wanted to be able to open our architecture to allow best in class automotive or even non-automotive products to be built onto our ecosystem. We don't want money. We don't want a toll road like other people try to charge, or you need to, we're going to charge you for API access. We really just want to help the dealers leverage the tools they're already using in a connected fashion that they get the best out of it. And our real goal behind that is to help centralize the customer data in a way that the dealer can better manage it. Because when you think about it, having a marketplace allows us to centralize one consumer profile and move that profile amongst the many systems the dealer is using. Instead of having to constantly ask the customer to re-enter their information, or worse, have the salespeople do it over and over again during the transactional experience. So that integrated marketplace to us, we think is the future of our business, just like it's the future has been outside of the industry.
So I'm curious, and I bet you the listeners are as well. What types of tools will you be planning to integrate into this marketplace concept?
Yeah, I'll turn this one over to Maarten. So I feel like he's the tool master. So I'll let him.
Tool master. So
Nice.
I'm sure the audience can't wait to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we're looking at integrating in a lot of different types of tools. Some of the early ones that we're expecting would be applications to help with verifying things like income, verifying insurance information. But with how we've built this platform, we can have it where third-party software developers can go and build best of breed solutions on top of us that they wouldn't normally be able to bring to the automotive space, because maybe you're a Survey Monkey, maybe you're a MarTech company. It would be very difficult for you typically to come in and work with the automotive space because it's not familiar to you. You don't have the right hooks to go pull in all the data. So what we've done is we've brought a 4-tiered approach to a marketplace, depending on the level of complexity and the level of information that a company needs and how they want users to come and work with it. From being able to surface a third party's tools inside of dealership websites, to having it where it's integrated into the customer experience inside of Core or into the dealership and agent side experience. We're able to handle it all the way from low code and no code to high touch API driven modern software development methods of integration, and everywhere in between. So we're trying not to be opinionated. We're trying to make it so that we're able to provide the easiest on-ramp for third parties to go and leverage our platform, similar to how an Apple App Store or Google App Store builds their marketplaces, where they're providing an easy on-ramp to go ahead and bring their software tools to as wide of an audience as possible.
This does not sound like your normal automotive tech play to me, boys. Gentlemen, however you'd like me to address you. Just what you shared there, Maarten, and obviously, Todd, you and I have been talking about this for a little while. This is, for the listening and or viewing audience, there's more than a few reasons to get excited about this, because that's not the type of talk that you hear in terms of inclusive, big tent. We don't want to be the ones that are driving the opinion. We want to be like an Apple or an Android store, open marketplace, allowing people to build on top of our technology. There are so many walled gardens in the automotive industry. There are in lots of industries, but what you guys are embarking on is it's a fascinating topic, because it's just not what people normally talk about, but it's been needed. Think about all the frustrations. I'm curious, we could do a whole episode on you guys helping to backfill the frustrations that dealers and companies that work with and on behalf of dealers have to deal with in terms of the frustrations of all these things that don't work well together or at all. And you guys seemingly are trying to bring a lot of correction to that, and a place where that can actually happen on the behalf of dealers, which is, I think it's great.
Yeah.
But rather than railroad the episode, I want to keep going and keep you guys on track a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about anticipated benefits of integration.
Sure.
How are you guys expecting? First, I guess the first question would be, how are you expecting to streamline something like workflows for dealers?
Yeah. So looking at this, obviously you're right. It is a big, ambitious task to do what we want to do. But we saw the benefit of being able to integrate dealers' best-in-class products that they're already using and open up the dealership marketplace to use what we consider global best-in-class products, like Maarten also mentioned, whether it's the MailChimp or tracks, like take your pick of type of company. But bringing it back a little bit, we see this as a really powerful opportunity for dealers and how this marketplace is being designed, and ultimately, I think it benefits the consumer that we need to ingest the information once and we can pre-fill the tools that the dealership is using. So let's talk about a workflow example, a very specific one. Let's talk about a trade-in process inside a store. So typically, let's say this starts on a website and I fill in a form with my information and it gives me a trade appraisal. That trade appraisal then goes into the CRM, and now a salesperson's going to call and try to schedule an appointment. So you think of that, and that's the same process you would see inside a digital retail platform or any other platform. We thought it would be better if we could, once we onboard the customer through our system and identity check, when the customer starts the trade process, half their data is already filled out. We already have their name, email, phone number, and basic information. We don't need that any longer. In fact, sometimes we might not even need their VIN number of the car they own. We can say, which one would you like to populate? Doing these things will take steps out of the process. We're acting as what I would consider a tool to help fill these systems with the right data once. So I don't have to ask for the consumer's data 3 or 4 or 5 times during a sales process. I can ask for it once to autofill those additional tools that are built on top of Core to speed that process and create a better workflow. So back to what I consider the trade-in process. For us, it just started with a conversation with the consumer. Customer wants to know the value of the trade. Good. We send a basic information collecting tool, whatever they're using, whether it's a TUD, trade ending, take your pick, right through messaging. Customer fills out only the needed information. An auto appraisal could go or not right through messaging. And at that point, let's say the consumer, like typical, says, I have a better deal from CarMax or Carvana. So at this point, most deals break with Core and how it's built. We can have a sales manager or used car manager hop into the same conversation with the salesperson and the customer to continue the conversation and make it much more dynamic, and maybe even reappraise the car, turn it into a video call, go outside, turn on the car, show me your dashboard and all the lights that light up. The possibilities are endless on redesigning workflows that are more customer centric, as well helping the dealer organize their data.
Yeah, and you just hit on a couple of things that get into enhancing the experience for the customer, right? There are countless workflows within the operations of a dealership, and many of them are centric around how the customer interfaces with the store. And it's kind of exciting to think about after so many years, really decades, where it's kind of same old, even recently. So many of these dealers that had some issues with their DMS side of their business, trying to figure out if they remembered how to do things without that. It just highlights the fact that there are all kinds of areas that still need improvement that we've been complacent kind of with for really far too many years. I'm curious, Maarten, I'm going to throw this to you a little bit, but do you see potential improvements around data consistency here with relative to integration?
Yeah, I think that both data consistency and trust from the customer in information management and trust on the dealership that the information that they're getting is accurate at all times. So extending off of Todd's example with the trade-in flow, if we go through the core verify and core identity end-to-end flow for that, we start off by being able to abstract different service providers, whether that's KBB, Trade Pending, AutoFi, Black Book, whomever, in a consistent experience for the end user. So they're able to, instead of them going to one system for part of their transaction, another system for a different part of their transaction, they get the experience that this is a well-guided workflow. Additionally, for being able to provide all that information, nobody likes filling out something that it can potentially be construed as a lead gen form. So we're able to even do things like integrate in with credit bureaus to go ahead and automatically onboard and detect customers and all of the requisite data in a way that provides ease of use for the customer and gives the dealership a lot more confidence in the veracity and accuracy of information that they're getting from this potential customer, and feed them that customer all the way through their entire journey with that level of automation. I don't think anybody else has really attempted it yet.
See, for me, even the example that you guys are utilizing on the trade-in workflow and that experience, that makes me excited for dealers because I know exactly what a well-executed trade-in tool on the dealership's website does in comparison to where the dealer typically spends same dollars to acquire leads from third-party sources. If you have a very well architected workflow for a trade-in evaluation on your website for your dealership, you're harvesting one of the highest quality leads at the lowest cost possible. And what you guys are talking about and making that process even better for a dealer, you literally can say to a dealer, this not only helps you reduce cost, but it improves your output. It improves profitability. Everyone says their stuff sells more cars. Just what you guys described right now, although it's much more technical, it absolutely will help the dealers sell more cars and profitably. And and what's beautiful about it is it's not lip service. So it's exciting, and it's sometimes hard to make technical topics like this exciting, but for people that have been in it and they're really paying attention to what you guys are talking about, it certainly makes I think a really compelling case for dealers to think, wow, like how soon can we be working on this with you guys? So I want to spin back a little bit because I did mention, Todd, as you were sharing, that you're definitely talking about things that enhance the customer experience. Do you guys have any particular goals that you're trying, anything within the customer experience that really is like, those are goals we really hope to help dealers with? Or is it just, right now it's still, there's not as much certainty? I'm just really curious to know if there's already things that you guys are kind of keen on.
Yeah, I think we would look at ourselves as a B2B, right? Like, we're not just a B2B company. We know that our job is to help the dealer, but that dealer's job is to serve the customer. So we need to be thinking all the way through the process to the customer. So we kind of started with the customer in all of our thinking and said, how do we just make it easy for the customer? Because if we make it easy for the customer and remove to us friction to go forward with a deal that's not confusing, and not changing multi-channels from text to email to voice calls through some other video call system. I'm not spread all over and the dealer is hitting me up 3 or 4 times. Hey, I need this again and again and again. Or, hey, please fill this out again and again and again. If we can unify that piece for the customer piece experience, then downstream, it makes it much easier for the dealer to do business with their consumers. And as I said, and Maarten said, we're not looking to replace the chiller's technology. We just want to integrate it into a way that's easy for the consumer to consume, easy for their sales team to utilize. That's it. And that's why I said our goal is to partner with all vendors inside the dealership we don't have any competitors, we believe, in automotive because we're willing to integrate all their services on top of our platform and do it for nothing. And the real goal is to benefit the consumer and it's people trying to sell cars each and every day and connect them up conversation.
Yeah, I said it before. I don't know that you guys particularly like the analogy or the big tent, but it feels that way to me. When I listen to that, it feels like it's truly inclusive, truly collaborative, and really not something that. And I've been in this industry for a minute. I just don't hear a lot of people talking about bring it all in. We want to benefit. We understand where we fall between the business to business side, and then we're serving those something that has a huge effect on the direct to consumer part of the dealership industry or the automotive industry. And you guys seemingly have thought through this very carefully, and I think it's it's a fascinating topic. Last thing on kind of anticipated benefits around the integration piece that I did want to ask is if you guys have any kind of projection around increases in operational efficiencies that you see with this.
We have no idea, but I can say, like, I can imagine things are going to take longer to do when you operationally create a more efficient mousetrap. And let's think about this for a few things that have always come to me like top of mind. By integrating any dealer service into a single unit, we're able to collapse the amount of times we need to ever ask for data to one. That to me is an efficiency for the consumer as well as the dealership. Second, that eliminates to us fat fingers or typed stuff in dealership systems that a salesperson or a customer had to do it a second or third time. So we can eliminate that as well. So we think that's going to be super helpful. 3, it helps salespeople. They'll only end up learning our system and whatever tools the dealership is using, the dealership will be able to change tools and not require a whole new learning curve for salespeople to figure it out. So if I changed from a trade pending to a KBB, right now I have to retrain all my team how the new system's going to work. I have to do, that's a lot of work. And with turnover at over 66% in sales on average annually inside dealerships, we felt solving this problem to make it easier and less burden on the dealer to be able to train his team to make them more productive faster. This was also a key attribute. And finally, I'll say security. As I alluded to before, I believe that it's very hard to knock all your people out of systems when you do let them go. You always seem to forget one. And we all know what happens when you forget a system and you have a disgruntled employee. That is a huge opportunity for fraud to begin from within. And 60% of all fraud starts within the store. Disgruntled employee, someone who gains access to a system. So our goal is to help secure the dealership and ultimately streamline the process for the dealership users as well as the consumers.
So let's talk a little bit about the road ahead on this part. Maarten, curious to know your thoughts on what your kind of development timeline looks like.
Yeah. So we have core platform live. We have dealerships using it for the marketplace. We're kind of ready for doing private preview, and we're talking with a multitude of companies to have it where they can be launch partners as we bring the full version of the marketplace to them. And in general, with how we've built out core, we tend to move very, very quickly. We do updates and changes to the platform on a daily basis. And I think any of our pilot dealerships that look at it, every time that they look at it again, there's always some improvement that they're seeing.
Yeah, that's excellent. How would you guys say right now dealers can get involved? I mean, is there a preferred way for people that are going to be consuming this or hearing about this, whether they're seeing a short clip of this or they watch the whole episode and they say, I'm kind of interested. How do I get involved with you guys? What do I need to know? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think for us, it's super easy. We're obviously on LinkedIn. They can DM us. They can go to our website. They can call us. They can email us. Anyway, we're completely open. We are looking for partners. I think even on our site at the bottom, there's a email link that says partners. They can email us so we know it'll get routed right to Maarten and team. that they could start those dialogues. Like any startup, which is what we are, our goal and ambition rests on just empowering a lot of these other automotive companies to gain more stores and ultimately get their product in front of more eyeballs. And I think for us, we're just a connected fabric in making that piece happen with our marketplace.
Well, all of that is extremely exciting. Before I move into our next segment, I do want to ask either of you if you have any final thoughts there before we move into segment 2.
What?
Even
I think the big one is that our approach has been to largely driven by the idea that customers want and expect modern tools to be very easy for them to use. And if you don't have that app style interactivity, then users tend to want to step away. And if the customer steps away from the dealership because they're frustrated with the tools, the dealer ultimately has a lower amount of sales that they can possibly get. So our approach of abstracting out the different automotive providers, we believe strongly is going to lead to better customer engagement and therefore more sales, as well as reducing friction and increasing trust and dependability of data within the dealership.
And I'm going to double down on that and say one more piece, which is salespeople and managers inside dealerships are the Gen Z, millennials, who also want app style tools that they don't have today. And every person I talk to is frustrated inside retail because they're using antiquated systems and technology that's built on old architectural design and not up to speed with what they're using natively on their phones, which is why many salespeople in the dealership always default to putting customers' PII on their own phone and not use a system. And that is a thing that has to be fixed, especially under the new FTC rules and CARS Act.
Yeah, that is extremely important for sure. And before we move on, I do want to say, and I should have said it on your last response, Todd, about training. That actually is a piece that really I think that the dealers need to strongly consider, because turnover, yes, is still and maybe forever is going to be an issue, especially around sales related positions in dealerships. But hand in hand with it is the training issue and retraining, training and retraining. And when you have that, kind of nonstop turnover happening at such a high percentage, that means that those people have to be retrained. And if you guys are helping to improve that, taking that really problem and flipping it around, that also is such what general manager, dealer principal, sales manager wouldn't be delighted to hear that they're going to actually have a significant improvement in not having to do as much training and retraining of people, because that takes time, it takes money. Again, those are things that actually cut down on costs to dealers, because it costs them in time, it costs them in paying people to have to be retrained, paying for the training. It's a very interesting concept that I wanted to mention, or at least bring a little more highlight to that, because that's really huge.
And adding on to that, how much time is lost in an average sale just from agent or manager having to duplicate information across all these different systems themselves?
Great point. So operational efficiency, a lot of people talk about it, a lot of things that you guys are doing here. It certainly seems to check a lot of boxes, solves a lot of problems that it appears that maybe you guys are the only ones that are trying to fix these things.
It's funny, Sean. It's all rooted in a Harvard Review article. They surveyed the Fortune 1000 companies. They put a clicker on everyone's monitor so they could see how many browsers they had opened and how often they switched between browsers. And it's a very interesting study that was done. And the average knowledge worker, which would be the same as a salesperson at a dealership, was switching 378 times per day tabs. Now, it takes seconds to not only just switch the tab with a click, they have something, I'll give you the fun technical term, ocular reorientation. So the time it takes me to look at a screen and I hit my brain and now I understand what I'm actually looking at takes seconds. When you compile this, 5 weeks per year are literally just spent clicking. If that's not a problem to solve, there is no problem to solve. The average dealer payroll is 5.1 or $2 million a year. So take 5 weeks of that. You're talking very good chunk of money that is wasted on their people just switching between systems and doing nothing, not adding any value to the dealership, not adding to sales, adding to nothing except sucking money out of the store's profitability. It is a problem worth solving.
Yes, it is. I'm glad you guys are about it. Yeah, it resonates. It's definitely a message that resonates for sure. Well, I'm going to take you guys into the second part of our conversation today. And so for the audience, we're switching now to talk a little bit about, actually quite a bit about dealership security and personal identifiable information, or PII protection. Some have some working knowledge of this, but most people that know anything about PII and dealership security, you typically find that their understanding is maybe not as deep as they think it is, and definitely as it should be. Once again, it's not always one of the things that people like to talk about because it's not as cool and fun as talking about, PMAX ads from Google and how much money you can waste there. It's more of a this could have catastrophic consequences to your business if you don't pay attention and you don't actually have the right people on your side to help through it. So I'm really interested to get into this as well. The importance here is huge. I'd kind of like to start here with, what are the current risks that dealers should know that are associated with PII breaches? And either of you can take it.
This is where I could just leave the building. This is all Maarten.
Maarten, now we know why you're on this episode. We're going
Maarten,
to
this is right. I said stage left.
So,
Maarten.
So to go through the risk first, it's important to understand that during the process of buying a vehicle, a customer has to go provide basically every piece of not just PII, but the even higher protected version of SPII, which is specialized or sensitive PII. And with that information, anyone with it can go and effectively steal someone else's identity, causing financial harm and ruin, or beyond financial, potentially having it where they can be misidentified as the cause of crime. When an organization is the source of a PII information breach, there's a ton of federal regulations out there now, and you hear it in the news whenever a large company runs into it, that they're now having to face legal liability and costs to go ahead and all of their customers' information that has potentially been breached. And they have to oftentimes do monetary compensation as well as provide services in the event that any of their information did end up in their identity being stolen. If you break it down, you have their social security number, you have their banking and account information, you have their employment history, you have their income history, everything that bad actor could possibly want to know about you, the dealership has. So a car dealership has roughly the same amount of risk for PII as a bank does. It is very, very high risk, and it has a lot of social stigma to an organization when there is a breach, and it is difficult to say how well protected you are.
So are there some reasons why the traditional methods that have been around for a long time, why they are really failing? They're just not quite doing the job?
So there's a lot of different traditional methods for securing PII. First one tends to be, I'm going to print everything out. I have it in an offsite, potentially secure storage, or I have a shredding service. But it's easy for information to fall through the cracks there. On the technology side, There is oftentimes protection within individual tools, saying tool A is protecting your information. But in order to go and integrate that over to your CRM or into your dealer management system, you're oftentimes taking it out of that protected system and transferring it in a way that is less secure, such as ADF XML, where it doesn't have in transit the protections to make sure that your customers are, or yourself as an organization, are protected. Additionally, there's not a lot of barrier to entry to getting access to this information inside of a lot of dealerships or inside of a lot of dealer facing tools. So if you're a sales agent, you can potentially get access to information that you don't really need to go ahead for selling a car, such as social security number and credit history, but it's not difficult for you to get access to that information. So what we've done is in Core is we've reduced that by having it where, based off your job role, we limit how much information you get based off what you really need to know. So sales agents, they know that you passed it. They get a swag at what your pricing capabilities are for monthly spend, but they don't get your full history as a customer.
Interesting. Several years ago, I got a call at about 3 o'clock in the morning from the authorities. I think it was a sheriff. It was late at night. It was either the police or a sheriff, and they were looking for my wife because the car that she used to drive, like 4 months prior, we had traded in on a new car, but her old Toyota had apparently been involved in a robbery.
Oh
And
no.
oh yeah. And at first they thought, well, we got him because clearly the paperwork wasn't handled correctly at the dealership, obviously some sort of security issue. And I'm wondering if you guys also think about how that can maybe be remedied with some dealers. Are there, when I think of personal identifiable information breaches, I always start to think, oh, has this happened with me a little bit? And that's one of the first things that I think about is what other information could have been gotten out there by the dealer when they don't even handle how the car came in. And then now the authorities are thinking that it's my wife who
Right.
robbed the 7-Eleven and left her Toyota in the parking lot. It's like, what?
I think that goes to some of the data standardization and syndication things that we were talking about in the previous segment of, by having it where you have a single tool that's able to orchestrate workflow between system A and system B, you help to mitigate some of the human error where someone is busy and they forget to file something like the transfer of title, which should be very difficult ordinarily to go ahead and forget about so that you can avoid cases like what you ran into. But if you're having to do that across a multitude of systems, human error tends to crop up. And by having an integration platform like Core, it can help mitigate those kinds of risks as well. Because we don't rely on the person to go, I need to remember to go do this step. We can see systemically, this person is at this portion in this workflow. We need to go and send information to this other system and make sure it gets done.
Appreciate you sharing on that. It helps me realize that you guys are going to make that part of the dealership better too. So I got a question a little bit on, and Todd mentioned this in the previous episode a little bit, when sometimes the threats are coming from the inside. So regarding let's call it the insider threat challenge, and either of you can help us in this regard, but perhaps share a little bit on the statistic on insider threats.
Yeah, so right now, if you look at regular fraud in businesses, like 60% is internal, starts internal. Now, could be disgruntled employee, could be employee has access to certain data, just selling it to someone else. We've seen instances recently where salespeople are just taking photocopy or taking copies with their phone of customers' driver's license, selling them on the dark web. They get about $500 or more a piece. So if you think you have let's say average salesperson, and he gets 5-6 of them a month, it's an extra, $2,500, $3,000 a month in his pocket. So it's not a little bit of money, especially when, new car sales are probably minis at $100 a piece. So there's money to be made from that data. So we thought through this in, we believe, a novel way that we don't want anyone at the dealership, especially salespeople, to have to touch the consumer's PII. We want the consumer to onboard themselves and be verified. And then inside our system, the manager knows that this customer is a legitimate customer or potentially fraudulent. Salespeople get a very limited view on anything because, as Maarten said before, it's all permission based. So we can determine who sees when, where, and how much. I think there is a future even within our system where we won't even expose salespeople to the consumer's email or phone number. They'll have buttons that they can easily contact the consumer through any channel, but exposing the data and the private number or email address below that is unnecessary. So again, I think part of our goal ultimately is to the dealership by limiting exposure of PII across the board. That is a guiding principle of ours, that we truly believe that, I don't need to know your email address to contact you. I just need the capability to do it. And, think about it from the fraudulent point where I could walk into any CRM today, download a file full of my customer records that contain a host of PII. And I'm going to take it out and go sell it. And it happens. And it will continue to happen unless dealerships put different systems and processes in place that prevent these types of actions.
And adding on to that, 60% of all data breaches are caused by insider threats. Not all of those are malicious. A lot of those tend to be due to improper usage of information going between systems. So we mitigate a lot of the improper usage. It's also important to recognize that out of that 60% number, that's risen by 47% since 2018. And the cost in that same period per insider threat incident has increased to an average of $11.5 million. It is a massive cost when something happens that's bad. Also, inside of our platform, outside of the permissioning, we start from a default stance that we don't trust anybody or anything, including ourselves. And that's process is called zero trust security. So instead, we look at every action that's being done with the expectation that it's potentially a hazard. And it only is allowed to happen, whatever that action might be, if it passes all of our checks and balances on each part of our system to say that this is something that is kosher.
So that's a good segue. You guys clearly have this innovative approach to PII protection, and you mentioned zero trust. Sounds like that's part of a larger vision for kind of your next generation security features. Is there more about that in the vision? I mean, you're sharing a lot of things here, trying to make sure that some of those are highlighted for dealers, that like just that alone, the zero trust thing is really critical. But are there other components of the vision around security features that are really passionate, things that you guys are focused on?
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that is important and is knowing what the traditional state is for why this is different. A lot of organizations will have it where you'll hear about their firewall or their DMZ, where they have this outer perimeter to the company that's supposed to protect everything inside of it. But the difference between that and our approach is we don't trust that edge either. If you're inside, we give you the exact amount of rigor for whether or not we're going to let something go through or happen as that traditional firewall approach is. And that makes it so that by default, we have to stand from a position of least access at all times. And we have to explicitly allow an action versus traditional method is kind of, if you're logged in, you can go do the action. So we believe strongly that this model will go ahead and mitigate a lot of accidental insider threat issues. Combined with our permissioning model for just accessibility of information, We're hoping that together greatly decrease the attack surface for any dealership. Additionally, we also do a cybersecurity assessment on every customer that's interacting with the dealership. So if you're talking to a dealership out of New York City, but you're connecting from a VPN out of North Korea, we're able to pick up on those kinds of activities and say that you're not allowed to go forward because you're misrepresenting yourself. And the same thing goes for a sales agent. If a sales agent is in Minnesota, generally, and we see a connection attempt from Uruguay or any other country, it raises red flags and we stop that person from being able to continue forward. And we also make sure that the dealership is aware when those kinds of issues come up so that they can go and action on it appropriately.
Yeah, Sean, this is that really interesting thing about what's called browser fingerprinting, what Maarten is discussing. So technology today exists that with our widget being starting on dealer website, starting a conversation for verification there, or for a QR code at the dealership, we understand the browser the consumer begins his conversations on. And by analyzing that browser and well over 200 attributes around that browser, we can determine a lot of very interesting things. Not only location, VPN, are they incognito? Are they coming from a known already fraudulent source? All those things we can see very early. Yeah. All those things we can see very early on in the process that allows us to put up what we call the spidey senses to start the protection wall to begin. And we think, again, there's no way you stop fraud with one bullet, right? You got to shoot a whole arsenal at it. And you have to continually change that arsenal because fraud is dynamic and it's always evolving, adapting to any situation and circumstance. So we have to match that cadence with levels of what we call multi-signaling, right? Using multiple different traps along the way to try to identify bad actors.
If it can be corrupted, it will be eventually, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, kind of how you guys are planning to limit employee access to sensitive data, but you already kind of answered that question, which I think is also really important. I mean, the people that are going to be consuming this type of content at the dealership level are going to want to know why would all of that matter, and how are you going to go about some of these things? I think that's important. I don't want to skip over, because sometimes as we're getting into this, you guys will have secondary and tertiary thoughts on all this, but as I get a little bit closer to the end of this segment, I do want to talk a little bit about what you guys would consider, and I know people like best practices were at one point, they were not even any practice. It was just, but you guys, as you are at the vanguard, really, for some of these things, you must have things in mind around recommendations for enhancing things like internal security measures. You've talked a little bit about some of those things, but would love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on that. And either of you can take this, but I really want to get a little bit of an idea of things that you would recommend to dealers for that very purpose.
I'll leave this to the security expert, Maarten.
All right. So the first recommendation is to try and make sure that any sensitive information, whether it's PII or otherwise to your dealership, is never on unmanaged devices. So not on sales agent cell phones, not on their laptops, not going through their personal email. And to help mitigate that, providing tools that make it so that the tool has a similar level of barrier to entry as the consumer grade tools that they're using in place of the enterprise level ones. If the tool itself is too difficult to use, people will find the way that is the least amount of friction for themselves to do that job, even if it's opening up your organization to legal liability and financial risk, as well as opening up your customers to similar liability.
What if you wanted to keep this information on a personal AI assistant?
A personal AI assistant falls into that same bucket of it's an unmanaged, untrusted source. Additionally, if it's inside of a personal AI assistant, that information can oftentimes be used as training data for the AI as a whole. So not just exposing your information within the small Copilot style assistant that you believe it's stuck in, but it's potentially being reused and resurfaced outside of your organization and outside of your Copilot because you're exposing it to a public service.
Here, I thought I was being humorous, interjecting that question, and there's a real legit answer behind it. Maarten, that's like extra 5,000 bonus points. That's 5,000 bonus points to you in the episode for taking what I thought was going to be a humorous addition and saying, no, there's actually legit answers to what you're talking about. I love it.
Yeah.
But now you got to double down, and Maarten will explain how you actually do it to be able to interact with those tools with AI.
I was going to first talk about some of the Copilot tools that are getting more popular and some of the issues that have come up because of them. So Microsoft recently tried piloting a new feature on top of their Copilot, but it ended up getting so much blowback from the security community that they had to roll back the feature altogether, where they could do a point-in-time look at your behaviors over time to say, hey, we're going to predict what you're going to want next so that your workday is easier. But unfortunately, all of the predictions were publicly available, as well as the historical view on your information was also very, very easy to go in and retrieve, exposing passwords, usernames, and all the information on your screen at those times. It was a really big issue. Adobe, who's famous for having Photoshop and Acrobat and a bunch of other tools, is getting in trouble right now because of the same exact issue. It's a very big issue right now with the generative AI community on private information or proprietary information ending up in public systems. Now, there are tools now to go ahead and mitigate that, but they're still fairly early in their life cycle, just like generative AI itself is only about 2 years old for being really usable. And we use those systems whenever we're trying to do things with AI so that we're not potentially leaking sensitive information to public provider like OpenAI.
Yeah, that's next thing you know, somebody's making their own custom GPTs, and your information's being utilized in ways that you don't want it to be. Yeah, very interesting.
And the barrier to entry for shadow IT operations on it's very low. Like, I want to go ahead and start asking an AI information about my CRM database so that I can make predictions and maybe provide better customer service. And the act of uploading all that information, I've now caused a data breach unintentionally. With the best of intentions, I want to provide better customer service.
Interesting. How about the importance of making sure your employees are trained, like so that they have, I mean, their level of awareness gets raised here? Do you guys have thoughts on this? Any recommendations, or is it just a foregone conclusion that they need to do something?
I think that it's not just that you need to do something, but there has to be controls in place to make sure that any training and awareness is up to date. If I were to look around right now for most information security training services that I've looked at over the last year, they don't even mention any of the newer stuff around AI concerns. And they also may not always be up to date with industry needs. So calling out the importance, not just to the dealership and the agent, but to the customer around what the level of risk is and why it's so important to protect it, not even if it causes you potentially to use a little bit more time using a tool that isn't necessarily on your phone. Core, in our case, we're on your mobile device, so we're trying to make sure that we're easier to use so that we don't run into that case. But even if you're at a dealership that's not using a tool like Core, the importance to the dealership and to the customer to not use unmanaged services for storing PII is incredibly important, and it needs to always be a front and center part of training any new person, as well as reminding people once a year. There was a case where a large game company, Blizzard Entertainment, a few years ago found that every one of their customer service agents who'd been there 3+ years would accidentally leak sensitive company information at an 80% rate. And it ended up being that their security training, they only got the day they joined the company. As soon as they started doing 12-month and 6-month reminders on that security course, their rate went from over 80% of those employees leaking company information to less than 2%. So it has to be an ongoing strategy that's always maintained to be effective.
Just listening to you share, Maarten, I don't think I'd be surprised if it got to a point where companies are maybe doing updates maybe once a quarter maybe becomes the minimum. I mean, especially as it relates to what's going on in the the explosion of AI, whether people are using it for graphics and people are using the large language models, all the different things you could do. Obviously, there's so many. And even our agency, we use a lot of different AI tools, but I've had people reach out to me and ask me all kinds of questions about, hey, I've got this huge database that we use. It's got all these dealers in it. It's got their names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and it's typically tied to their big database for their email marketing. And I was thinking about doing this and like dumping this into one of these. And I'm like, I wouldn't do that. Do not do that. That just makes me so nervous because there's already so much compliancy and regulation around just having clean email databases that listening to you share about this, I'm thinking, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if dealers need to adopt a more frequent update to their employees just to stay up on these things. And obviously, I think I would be curious to know if you guys would agree with me, but I think that's one of the things that you guys can also bring to the relationships that you have with your dealer clients is helping them stay up on that so they don't, because I can imagine just a dealer thinking, how am I going to keep up with all of the unfolding, technology in the AI world and what we need to know and not know, that partnering with you guys, that you guys can also help dealers know what they need to know there as well.
Yeah, I look, our goal from the beginning is to be a partner to our dealers and to help them however they need it. Obviously, with data and security, it's very core to who we are and protecting that, but also extending that knowledge into our partners, dealership partners, organizations is I'll use the term core part of who we are. I love to be able to use our name in almost everything I talk about, so it's really good. It was a good pick. So, and I think the other thing to mention, not only the AI piece, is just phishing schemes inside dealerships. Dealerships are highly vulnerable to phishing, opening up emails or text messages, clicking links, especially when they're using these systems that don't have like really good, strong security protocols on them. So I think in the end, dealers should constantly be looking at, phishing schemes inside their store, testing like monthly, testing their users. I think there's already trading companies that do some of that today. I think it's a good investment that the dealer, it takes one employee clicking one link. I'm certain that this recent giant automotive CDK act will result that somewhere someone clicked on something and it was the wrong something to click on. They had to get in somewhere, and or it could have been through a disgruntled employee at the other company or whatever it is. It's always going to resolve down to a critical moment in time.
Somebody opened what's on Stranger Things? What's the thing they opened the portal into?
The portal, yes.
Somebody
to the upside down, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's responsible. Well, last couple of things I want to ask, and either of you can take it, or maybe I got a couple of questions, and either of you, maybe each of you will answer one of these. But just for dealers that are thinking about this in terms of dealership security going into the future, we just have not just gone through the threat, but literally a terrible attack on the CDK situation. What do you guys see as emerging threats potentially, and how are you preparing to tackle some of those? And then part two, or the second part of the question, last one I want to ask you guys is, how are you guys planning to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I'll let Maarten take that first part.
Okay. So emerging threats, one of the big ones is AI and data leakage. It's very, very easy to, with the best of intentions right now, to cause insider leaking of private information, as we just went through. To help mitigate that, we do a lot of audit logging on our own system to make sure that if someone does an action that could potentially be used for exfiltrating data, even if they're authorized to go do it and everything looks good, we log that and alert that so that someone who's in charge of compliance at the dealer group can go ahead and see an action on that and say, hey, what happened here? Was this actually reasonable? Additionally, for things to mitigate like the CDK breach, we have on top of our zero trust process, we default to a stance of serverless. So we don't have access to our own servers. Instead, we manage just the little tip of the system that is our custom code. Everything else is abstracted from us. So even if someone within core accidentally clicked on a link that included a rootkit and encrypted and tried to encrypt something, there's nowhere for the rootkit to actually latch onto that we have access to. So we try and mitigate the issues before they can become an issue by just not having those pieces. And I think with that approach, we'll be able to continue to stay ahead of security threats, but we always keep an eye to the future on this. Things like AI-based information security are still very much in their infancy, but we try and stay on the front lines of it as much as we possibly can.
Todd, final thoughts before I recap this episode?
I love this. I feel like I learn every time I come on our own episodes. Yes, I think more important, this is a very dynamic, changing space. Technology is one of those things, and fraud prevention is a constant moving target. Technology is a moving target, and AI is a moving target. I think the best way to always stay on top of this is to continue learning, continue to keep the open mindset, continue to look at best practices, but they're constantly evolving. We're dynamic today. There's no set it and forget it any longer. And dealerships who take a stance that I put this in place, I don't need to think about it anymore, that risk will continue to grow. So I think they have to take a constant, what I consider evolving stance on all this, relook at it consistently. I don't think there will be no more set it and forget it, and I'm always protected. A great example that I'll end on right now, we've spent a lot of time focusing on our multi-signaling process around fraud. And part of that, just like other vendors in the industry, everyone wants to take pictures and take a liveness interaction of the consumer's face to match the driver's license. Just recently, I saw another fraud guide, and they were discussing a new app that is out today that allows to grab the picture of the driver's license, and it allows you to take and create an AI clone of it's you moving your mouth, lips, but the other driver's license, that fraud face on it, and it will pass the liveness test. So it's enough, and we think we're doing the best we can, and the fraudsters are just keeping pace with what we're doing. They have access to the same tools, the same technology, so they're fighting to get past the systems, and we have to fight twice as hard to keep them out. But it was amazing to see the AI tech live pass. So basically, in the software, you can project it to your phone. So I could be in a FaceTime call with someone pretending I'm an old man or whatever. Well, I'm already old. Let's just say I'm pretending I'm a young 20-some-year-old man with a man face buying a car. And I could completely change my voice, change everything, and create a defrauded experience. This is going to be incredibly important as more dealers sell cars farther away from home during remote transactions. You need a multi-signaling process in place. No one thing is going to catch all the bad actors that want to do business with your store.
It's amazing. I learn on these episodes as well. I'm fascinated by it. I've already done it on this episode once with the old story of my wife's car situation, thinking that she robbed a 7-Eleven. I also can tell you that some of the tools that our company uses from an AI perspective, you just mentioned a few things that made me realize we have a new AI voice capability within software that we're using right now that we used on an episode where I don't know what I said, but it wasn't what I wanted to say. And so we said, okay, well, how well does it learn what I sound like? And you guys have seen all the examples of where this has been being used for nefarious reasons. I used it so I could clean up an episode, and our whole team couldn't tell that I went in and let it train from my voice, typed in what I wanted it to say, and it sounded just like me. They didn't even know. They were like, what? And so I think it's really important, and I'm glad that there's at least core AI out there that you're telling the dealer world that it isn't going to be good enough to just say, hey, we figured it out and now it's good. Like set it and forget it. We've updated ourselves and now we can go another 30 years without paying attention to these things. That's not good enough, because I guess one of the things that you're saying, Todd, and it's true, there's a good and an evil side of it. You guys are on the good guy side, right? Trying to help dealers in an area that's very critically important, because all of the same technology and capabilities are in the hands of the people who want to do evil with it as well. And you need to know that. So what a awesome conversation, gentlemen. Let me do a quick recap. Our first segment, audience, you guys, I'm sure we're loving this. This is good stuff. We discussed the future of dealership operations with the dealership OS and the integrated marketplace. We talked about the problems with current software, QoreAI's vision for a unified platform, all the benefits of integrating automotive specific and best in class non-automotive applications into this marketplace. I think that's super exciting. Todd, you mentioned too that a lot of the generation now that sits on the retail side of automotive, that they're going to love that as well. That's what their expectation is. So Todd and Maarten, I really appreciate all the insights here. You guys also highlighted the development timeline. I appreciate that. Todd, you were right. It's good to have Maarten on for some of the deep dives and getting into the weeds. Second segment, we focused on the dealership security side and PII protection. The growing risks of PII breaches is a real thing. It has been, and it's only been accelerating for years. There is also that insider threat challenge. You also have to know about that. And I bet you some dealers that are consuming this content might even have their own personal examples of that happening at their store. QoreAI's got an innovative approach to that. So I think that's really important because they shared a lot of information about securing sensitive data. We also talked about the best practices for enhancing the internal security measures and the importance of that with your employee training and how frequent you're going to make sure that they stay up on those things. And then finally, we looked at the emerging trends really of where you guys plan to stay ahead of what's going on in security, PII, dealership operating system. I think it's awesome. So to the listeners, be sure that you connect with Todd and Maarten on LinkedIn. They're both there. They share a lot of insightful information. It's one of the best places to connect with them as thought leaders. If you're watching the episode on YouTube, hey, hit the subscribe button so then you're the first to know when we launch new episodes. And thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you again soon right here on the Core Conversations podcast.